The air in Viscount Thornwood's study was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of financial ruin. Outside, a late autumn rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the bleakness in Lady Verity Elise's heart. At 18, Verity was a burden, a crumpled footnote in the social register, forever defined by the withered, lame leg that kept her from the ballroom and the marriage mart. She clung to her only friend, a small, trembling terrier named Flicker, as her father paced. "You are worthless, Verity. A failed transaction," roared Viscount Rupert Thornwood. His eyes, devoid of affection, fixed on the silent, formidable figure standing by the door, a man introduced only as Valerius, the creditor's representative. "The man is accepting payment in kind," Rupert sneered, pointing a trembling finger. "You, girl, and your wretched dog are the final balance." My beautiful family, before we dive into Verity's story, I need to share something important with you. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers, and right now there are only limited spots to be among our founding 1,000. Our inner circle who were here from the beginning, and I want you to be among our most cherished first 1,000. These first 1,000 subscribers will always hold a special place in this community. You'll be the ones who believed in these stories when we were just starting out, the ones who helped build something beautiful. But here's the thing. Once we hit that milestone, that opportunity closes forever. You'll still be welcome, but you won't be part of that exclusive founding group who shaped this channel's journey. So if you've been watching without subscribing, now is your moment. Don't let this story end without you being part of our family. Click that subscribe button, because Verity's story of being underestimated and then cherished? That's what this community is all about, seeing the worth in what others overlook. Let's reach this milestone together. Subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think will happen when Verity discovers Valerius's true identity. Will she forgive his deception? Can a duke and an unmarriageable daughter truly find happiness together? Now, let's begin Verity's journey. Verity's fingers tightened in Flicker's soft fur, the only warmth in the cold room. She had known this moment would come eventually. Her father's gambling debts had grown monstrous over the past year, swallowing her mother's jewelry, the family silver, even the portraits of long-dead Thornwoods that had hung in the gallery. That he would finally sell her, though he dressed it in the language of settlement and arrangement, surprised her less than it should have. "Father, please," she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice. "I could work. I could take a position as a governess, or—" "Who would hire you?" Rupert's laugh was cruel, cutting. "A cripple who can barely manage the stairs? You've been nothing but an expense, eating my food, wearing dresses no man will ever appreciate. At least this way, you serve some purpose." The man by the door, Valerius, had not moved. Verity dared a glance at him, immediately regretting it. He was tall, devastatingly so, with shoulders that seemed to fill the door frame. His clothes were rough, a laborer's garb, but they fit him with an unsettling precision that suggested the body beneath was all disciplined muscle. Dark hair was pulled back severely from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and hard planes, with eyes the color of winter's steel that revealed absolutely nothing. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to feel. "The agreement is complete, then," Valerius said. His voice was low, rough-edged, the accent of someone who had worked with his hands all his life. Yet there was something underneath it, some quality Verity couldn't quite name. Authority, perhaps, or danger. Yes, take her." Rupert waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to the papers on his desk. "The dog, too, if you must. Mangy thing, eats more than it's worth." Flicker growled, a small, brave sound that made Verity's heart ache. Valerius moved then, crossing the room with a predator's grace. Up close, he was even more imposing. Verity had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, though she wished she hadn't. They swept over her with clinical assessment, her twisted leg, her plain dress, her white-knuckled grip on her dog. She waited for the disgust, the disappointment. Men always wore it so clearly when they looked at her. But his expression remained unreadable. "Can you walk?" he asked. The question, practical and void of mockery, startled her. "Yes, I have a cane. Bring it." She limped to where her cane rested against her chair, each step a familiar humiliation under her father's impatient gaze. Flicker trotted at her heels, his small body pressed against her good leg, as if he could somehow make her stronger. "I've prepared her things," Rupert said, gesturing to a single, pathetic trunk by the door. "Not that there's much. I sold most of her mother's jewelry already. The girl has a few books, some clothes. Nothing of value." "Nothing of value," Valerius repeated, and something flickered across his face too quickly for Verity to catch. "I see." He picked up the trunk as if it weighed nothing, tucking it under one arm. Then, without warning, he turned to Verity. "You'll come with me now. We have a long journey ahead." "Where? Where are we going?" she managed. "North, to the estate." "Will I be? What will my position be?" For the first time, something that might have been emotion crossed his features. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That remains to be determined." Rupert laughed again, that terrible, gleeful sound. "Position? Girl, you're chattel now. Property. You'll do whatever work he sets you to, and you'll be grateful for the roof over your head." He leaned back in his chair, already reaching for his brandy. "Frankly, Valerius, you've gotten the worse end of this bargain. But a debt's a debt." Verity felt the familiar shame burn through her chest. The worthlessness her father had spent years cultivating, settling over her shoulders like a familiar cloak. She was nothing. She had always been nothing. "Come." Valerius's command was soft but absolute. He was already moving toward the door. She followed, because what else could she do? Each step with her cane echoed in the silent study. Her father didn't look up, didn't say goodbye. Why would he? She had never been a daughter to him, only a ledger entry that had finally been balanced. As Valerius held the door open, Verity paused, compelled by some foolish instinct to look back one last time at the only home she had ever known. The study was already empty of her. Her father absorbed in his papers, a fresh cigar between his teeth. She turned away and stepped into the rain-dark hallway. Flicker pressed against her leg, following a stranger into an unknown future that could hardly be worse than the past she was leaving behind. The carriage was not what Verity had expected. It was sturdy and well-maintained, certainly, but utterly devoid of comfort or ornament. Plain black lacquer, hard wooden seats, no cushions. The kind of conveyance used for transporting goods rather than people. Valerius had handed her up without ceremony, his grip firm and impersonal, then lifted Flicker in after her before swinging himself onto the driver's seat. They had been traveling for hours now, and he had not spoken a single word. Verity watched the London streets give way to villages, then to open countryside shrouded in autumn mist. The rain had settled into a persistent drizzle that turned everything gray and indistinct. Flicker slept fitfully on her lap, occasionally whimpering in dreams. She stroked his ears mechanically, her mind churning. What kind of work would she be expected to do? She could read and write, keep accounts, perhaps teach children if there were any on the estate. But her leg made most physical labor impossible. Would she be turned out when Valerius realized how truly useless she was? Would she end up in some workhouse or worse? The uncertainty gnawed at her until she could bear the silence no longer. "How far is the estate?" she called up to the driver's seat. 2 days. His voice was barely audible over the rain and the horse's hooves. Verity waited for more, but nothing came. "Will we stop for the night?" "Yes." "At an inn?" "Yes." It was like trying to draw blood from stone. Verity felt a flash of irritation cut through her anxiety. She might be property now, as her father had so delightfully put it. But surely she deserved to know something about where she was being taken. "What is the estate called?" she tried again. There was a long pause. Then, "Shadowmere." "Is it large?" "Large enough." "What crops does it produce? Or is it primarily livestock?" "Both." Verity gritted her teeth. "And what will my duties be?" This time the silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer at all. Finally, without turning, "That depends on what you're capable of." "I can read," she said, lifting her chin even though he couldn't see her. "Latin, French, and Italian. I can manage household accounts, write correspondence, and I have some skill with watercolors. I understand medicinal herbs and can prepare basic remedies. I'm not entirely useless, despite what my father believes." "I didn't say you were useless. You didn't say much of anything." She heard it then, a sound that might have been a breath of amusement, though it was too brief to be certain. The carriage rolled on through the rain. An hour later, as the gray afternoon darkened toward evening, Verity tried a different approach. "Have you worked at Shadowmere long?" "Long enough." "Do you manage the entire estate?" "I manage what needs managing." That's not really an answer. It's the answer you're getting. Flicker raised his head and yawned, his small pink tongue curling. Verity envied him his ability to simply accept their circumstances without question. But then, Flicker had always possessed a better judge of character than she did. The little dog had taken an instant dislike to her father's friends, growling at the men who would later be revealed as cheats and charlatans. Yet he hadn't growled at Valerius, despite the man's intimidating presence. "Is Flicker allowed on the estate?" she asked. "He's very well behaved. He won't chase the chickens or disturb the livestock." For the first time, Valerius turned slightly, glancing back at her through the small opening behind the driver's seat. His steel-gray eyes found the terrier on her lap, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The dog stays with you." It wasn't much, but the certainty in his voice eased something tight in Verity's chest. Whatever else happened, they wouldn't separate her from Flicker. "Thank you," she said quietly. He turned back to the road without acknowledgement. They stopped as full darkness fell at a coaching inn called the Broken Wheel. Valerius secured 2 rooms, separate, Verity noted with relief, and arranged for a simple meal to be brought up. He carried her trunk upstairs himself, refusing the innkeeper's offer of a boy to help, and set it at the foot of her bed with the same efficient precision he seemed to bring to everything. "Eat, sleep. We leave at dawn," he said, and turned to go. "Wait." Verity struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on her cane. He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. I wanted to ask, am I to call you Master or Sir? I don't even know your full name." He was quiet for so long she thought he would simply leave without answering. Then, "Valerius is sufficient." "Just Valerius?" "Just Valerius. And what should you call me?" "Lady Verity seems rather absurd now, given the circumstances. His jaw tightened. What would you prefer? The question surprised her. No one had asked her preference about anything in longer than she could remember. Verity. Just Verity. He nodded once, sharp and final. Verity, then. Lock your door. He was gone before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden floor of the hallway. Verity heard the door of the adjacent room open and close, and then silence. She sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. Flicker jumped up beside her, circling 3 times before settling against her hip. The room was small but clean, the bed serviceable. Through the thin wall, she could hear the faint sounds of movement. Valerius preparing for sleep, she assumed. Who was he really? Not just a foreman or overseer, surely. The way he carried himself spoke of authority, of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Yet he worked for someone else, collected debts, transported unwanted daughters like cargo. And despite his coldness, his refusal to engage in anything resembling conversation, he had secured her a private room, had ensured Flicker could stay with her, had asked what she preferred to be called. Small mercies from a hard man. Verity ate the bread and cheese that had been brought up, shared bits with Flicker, and tried not to think about what awaited her at journey's end. Whatever Shadowmere held, she would face it. She had survived 18 years of her father's cruelty. Surely she could survive this too. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of London and everything she had been. They arrived at Shadowmere as dusk painted the sky in shades of charcoal and amber. Verity had expected something grim, a crumbling cottage perhaps, or a drafty servants' quarters attached to some grand manor. What she found instead left her momentarily speechless. The house stood alone at the edge of a dense forest, separated from the main estate buildings by perhaps half a mile of rolling meadow. It was small, yes, but built of good stone with a slate roof and mullioned windows that caught the dying light. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone had prepared for their arrival. The whole structure radiated a kind of austere competence that seemed entirely in keeping with the man who had brought her here. Valerius brought the carriage to a halt and climbed down without a word. He had maintained his near silence throughout the second day of travel, answering her occasional questions with the same terse efficiency that seemed to be his only mode of communication. Verity had finally given up trying to draw him out, retreating into her own thoughts as the landscape transformed from gentle English countryside to something wilder and more remote. He opened the carriage door and offered his hand. His grip was warm despite the evening chill, his palm calloused in a way that spoke of genuine labor. She stepped down carefully, testing her weight on the uneven ground, and felt his hand remain at her elbow until she was steady. "This is where you'll stay," he said, retrieving her trunk. Verity looked up at the house, then back at the distant buildings she could just make out through the gathering darkness. Lights flickered in windows there, the main manor, presumably, where the estate's owner resided. "Alone?" "I'm here." She blinked. "You live here?" "The overseer's house," he said, as if that explained everything. He was already moving toward the door, her trunk balanced on one shoulder. "Your room is upstairs." The interior matched the exterior, functional, orderly, and surprisingly comfortable. The main room held a well-worn but solid table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace where a fire had indeed been laid and lit. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that looked actually read rather than decorative. A narrow staircase led to the upper floor. Everything was scrupulously clean. Not a speck of dust, not a dish out of place. The floor had been recently swept, the windows cleaned to clarity. It was the home of a man who demanded order from his surroundings, as rigorously as he seemed to demand it from himself. Valerius carried her trunk upstairs without waiting for a response. Verity heard his boots on the floor above, the sound of a door opening. Flicker, who had been exploring the perimeter of the room with his nose to the ground, suddenly trotted to the base of the stairs and sat, tail wagging, looking up expectantly. "Traitor," Verity murmured. "You're supposed to be loyal to me." When Valerius descended, Flicker immediately approached him, tail still wagging with an enthusiasm that bordered on betrayal. The little terrier had never warmed to anyone so quickly, not even to Verity's mother before she died. Yet here he was, practically begging for attention from this granite-faced man who seemed incapable of offering warmth to anyone. To Verity's absolute astonishment, Valerius paused. For a long moment, he simply looked down at the dog. Then, slowly, he crouched and extended one large hand. Flicker sniffed it thoroughly before pressing his small head into Valerius's palm, a gesture of complete trust. Valerius's expression didn't change, but his hand moved, rough fingers scratching behind Flicker's ears with a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with everything else about him. The dog made a sound of pure contentment. "He likes you," Verity said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Dogs are better judges of character than people." Valerius straightened, and Flicker sat at his feet as if they'd been companions for years. "Your room is the second door on the right. There's a basin and water. Supper will be ready shortly. You cook? Someone has to. I could help. You'll rest tonight. We'll discuss your duties tomorrow." He moved to the fireplace, adding another log with the same precise efficiency he brought to everything. "The privy is out back. There's a lamp by the door if you need it after dark." Verity felt suddenly, overwhelmingly exhausted. 2 days of travel, the constant uncertainty, the strangeness of this new place, it all pressed down on her at once. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the room. For bringing Flicker. For not being cruel." Valerius went very still. When he turned to face her, something flickered in those winter steel eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something more complicated. "Why would I be cruel?" "Because you can be. Because She gestured vaguely at herself, at her cane, at all the inadequacies her father had catalogued so thoroughly. "Because there's no reason not to be." "There's never a reason to be cruel," he said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very hard. "Not to those who don't deserve it." Before she could respond, he turned back to the fire. "Go. Rest. I'll call you when the food is ready." Upstairs, Verity found her room as orderly as everything else. A narrow bed with clean linens, a small wardrobe, a chair by the window. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed. The window looked out over the darkening forest, and in the distance, she could see the lights of the main manor house twinkling like earthbound stars. She sank onto the bed, testing its firmness. Better than what she'd had at her father's house, certainly. Everything here was better, simpler, but better. Honest in a way that Viscount Thornwood's crumbling gentility had never been. Flicker bounded up the stairs and into the room, jumping onto the bed with the confidence of a dog who knew he was welcome. He circled once, twice, then settled against her leg with a satisfied sigh. "You felt it, didn't you?" Verity whispered, stroking his soft fur. "Something about him. Something different." The dog's tail thumped against the quilt. Below, she could hear Valerius moving around the kitchen, the quiet sounds of a solitary man preparing a meal. A pan scraped against iron. water poured. Everything methodical, everything controlled. But she had seen his hand gentle on Flicker's head, had heard that quiet conviction in his voice. There's never a reason to be cruel. Who was Valerius, really? And what kind of overseer lived in such disciplined solitude, surrounded by books and order, treating an unwanted burden with more consideration than her own father ever had? The questions multiplied, but Verity was too tired to chase them. Tomorrow would bring answers, or at least the beginning of understanding what her life at Shadowmere would become. For tonight, she had a clean bed, a warm house, and a strange, silent man who had been unexpectedly kind. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Verity woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. The steady, rhythmic thwack echoed through the morning mist, and when she limped to her window, she saw Valerius in the yard below, splitting logs with the kind of controlled violence that spoke of both strength and precision. He had stripped down to his shirt sleeves despite the autumn chill. And even from this distance, she could see the play of muscle beneath the fabric with each swing. She looked away, feeling her cheeks warm. Whatever he was, overseer, foreman, creditor's representative, he was still a man, and she had no business noticing such things. By the time she made her way downstairs, moving carefully on the narrow steps with her cane, Valerius had come back inside. His shirt was damp with sweat, his dark hair disheveled. He glanced up as she entered, then moved to the stove where a kettle was already heating. "Tea?" he asked. "Please." She settled into one of the chairs at the table, Flicker immediately taking up position at her feet. "I should help with breakfast, and I'll need to know what my duties are." "I meant what I said. I can keep accounts, write letters, prepare remedies if you have an herb garden." "You've been here one day." "Yes, and I've done nothing to earn my place." She straightened her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "I won't be a burden, Valerius. Put me to work." He set a cup of tea before her, the steam curling up between them. His expression was unreadable as always, but she thought she detected something in his eyes, assessment perhaps, or a kind of cautious respect. "Can you mend?" he asked finally. "Clothing, you mean?" "Yes, of course." "There's a basket of items that need attention. Torn seams, missing buttons." He gestured to a corner where, indeed, a sizable basket sat waiting. Most of the estate workers are too busy with harvest preparation to manage their own repairs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. Verity nodded. "I can do that. What else?" "That will be sufficient for now. But surely there's more." "Verity." Her name in his low, rough voice stopped her mid-protest. "You don't need to prove anything. Not here." The kindness in those words, delivered in his typically blunt manner, made her throat tighten unexpectedly. She looked down at her tea, afraid he might see the sudden brightness in her eyes. The days fell into a pattern. Verity took over the mending, setting herself up at the table by the window where the light was best. She had expected a handful of items, but the basket seemed bottomless. Shirts with torn elbows, trousers with split seams, a child's dress with a hem that had come completely undone. She worked steadily, her stitches small and even, while Flicker snoozed at her feet and Valerius came and went on estate business. On the third day, she attempted to carry the finished mending outside to the line, thinking to air the garments before returning them. The steps down from the door were uneven, and she had to navigate them carefully with her cane, the basket balanced awkwardly on her hip. She didn't hear Valerius approach until he spoke directly behind her. "Stop!" She froze, startled. He took the basket from her without asking, then studied the steps with a frown. Wait here." He was gone before she could argue, striding off toward one of the outbuildings with that purposeful gait that seemed to devour distance. Verity stood on the top step, bewildered, until he returned 20 minutes later with several planks of wood and a box of tools. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Building a ramp." He set down the materials and began measuring the distance from the door to the ground with a length of rope. "You don't need to. The steps are a hazard." He didn't look up, already marking measurements on the first plank. For everyone. But they both knew he was building it for her. Verity watched in silence as he worked, the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, now directed at creating a gentle slope that would allow her to navigate the entrance without risking a fall. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had built things before, his hands sure and capable. When he finished, he tested it himself, walking up and down several times to ensure it was stable. Then he stepped aside and gestured for her to try. The difference was extraordinary. What had been a daily challenge, a reminder of her inadequacy, became simply a path. She walked down easily, her cane barely needed, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was clenched tight. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with everything in her. He only nodded, already gathering his tools. That afternoon, she was in the garden behind the house. There was indeed an herb garden, somewhat overgrown but full of useful plants, when Flicker decided to wage war on a particularly persistent butterfly. The little dog leaped and barked, spun in circles, and generally made a complete fool of himself in pursuit of something he had no hope of catching. Verity laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "Flicker, you absolute menace. Even if you caught it, what would you do with it?" "You'd probably apologize." "He would?" She startled. Valerius had emerged from the house so quietly, she hadn't heard him. He stood watching Flicker's aerial acrobatics with something that might have been amusement softening the hard line of his mouth. "He once caught a mouse in my father's house," Verity said, emboldened by that almost smile. He was so horrified by his own success that he stood guard over it for hours, barking at anyone who came near, as if he was protecting it from other predators. The mouse eventually just walked away while he wasn't looking. "A fierce hunter," Valerius said. And there it was. An actual smile, small and fleeting, but unmistakable. It transformed his face entirely, softening the harsh angles and bringing warmth to those winter-gray eyes. Verity felt her breath catch. This was what he looked like when the walls came down, even just for a moment. This was the man Flicker had sensed beneath the granite exterior. The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared, and Valerius seemed to realize what he'd revealed. He cleared his throat. "I need to ride out to the western fields. I'll be back before dark." "Of course." She kept her voice light, casual, as if she hadn't just witnessed something precious and rare. He turned to go, then paused. "The herb garden. If you want to restore it properly, there's a book on medicinal plants in the library. 3rd shelf, red binding." "You have a book on medicinal plants?" "I have books on many things." Something in his tone suggested she shouldn't ask why. "Use whatever you need." He left then, striding away toward the stables, and Verity stood in the garden with dirt on her hands and hope blooming unexpectedly in her chest. He had built her a ramp. He had given her meaningful work. He had smiled at her ridiculous story about her ridiculous dog. Small things, perhaps. Practical compassions from a practical man. But they were more than anyone had given her in longer than she could remember. And they mattered more than he could possibly know. The door had always been locked. Verity had noticed it her first week at the overseer's house. a heavy oak door at the end of the upstairs hallway, its iron handle never yielding when she passed. She had assumed it was storage, or perhaps Valerius's private chamber, and thought nothing more of it, until the night she found it standing open. She had come downstairs for water, unable to sleep, her mind too full of the strange contentment she'd found in this isolated place. Valerius had ridden out that afternoon to inspect the harvest preparations and hadn't yet returned. The house was dark and quiet, only the dying embers in the fireplace providing any light. On her way back upstairs, cup in hand, she saw it. The forbidden door ajar, golden lamplight spilling into the hallway. Verity knew she shouldn't look. Privacy was privacy, and Valerius had given her no permission to explore his spaces. But curiosity, that persistent demon, won out over propriety. She pushed the door open slightly and caught her breath. It was a library. Not a collection of books, but a true library. The kind she had only seen in the great houses her father had dragged her to before his finances collapsed entirely. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with hundreds of volumes. A great desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with papers, ledgers, and what appeared to be architectural drawings. More books were stacked on a side table, some lying open as if recently consulted. She stepped inside, drawn by a hunger she hadn't realized had grown so acute. Her father had sold most of the Thornwood Library years ago. The few books she'd been allowed to keep were primers and novels, nothing of substance. But these? Her fingers traced the spines reverently. Aristotle, Plutarch, extensive collections of history and philosophy, scientific treatises on agriculture, animal husbandry, engineering, poetry in 3 languages, political economy, legal texts that looked well thumbed and annotated. She pulled out a volume at random, Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy, in the original Italian. The margins were filled with notes in a bold, decisive hand. Valerius's hand, she realized. Not just owned, but studied, argued with. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered to the empty room. What kind of overseer, what kind of common foreman, read Renaissance political philosophy in Italian and made notes disputing the author's premises? She selected another book, then another. Each revealed the same pattern: serious works of literature, history, and statecraft, all clearly read and considered. The collection spoke of a mind that was not merely educated, but actively intellectual, constantly engaged with ideas. A sound from downstairs made her freeze. The front door opening, boots on the floor. Valerius had returned. She should have left immediately, returned to her room, pretended she'd never trespassed. Instead, she found herself pulling down a copy of More's Utopia and settling into the chair by the window, unable to resist. Just a few pages. Just enough to remember what it felt like to exercise her mind on something more challenging than mending and herb gardens. She was so absorbed in More's vision of an ideal commonwealth that she didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs. Didn't realize she'd been discovered until Valerius's voice, carefully controlled, broke the silence. That door was locked for a reason. Verity's head snapped up, guilt flooding her cheeks with heat. He stood in the doorway, still in his riding coat, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. She scrambled to her feet, nearly dropping the book in her haste. "I'm so sorry. I saw it open and I shouldn't have." The words tumbled over each other. "Please, I'll go. I won't come back. I just haven't seen so many books in so long and I couldn't help." "You read Latin?" The question, utterly unexpected, stopped her stammering. "What?" He gestured to the book in her hands. "More wrote in Latin. That's not a translation." "Oh, yes, I read Latin and Italian and French." My mother insisted I be properly educated, even if—" She trailed off. Even if no man would ever marry her. Even if it was a waste of resources on a crippled daughter. Valerius moved into the room, shrugging off his coat and draping it over the back of the desk chair. He was watching her with that intense focus she'd come to recognize, as if he was reassessing everything he thought he knew. "What do you think of More's central premise?" he asked, settling into the chair behind his desk. "That private property is the root of social inequality?" Verity blinked, thrown by the shift from confrontation to, what, intellectual discourse? "I think he's partly right. Property does create division. But he ignores the problem of human nature. His utopians only function because More has written them as unnaturally virtuous. Real people are more complicated." "Go on." She hesitated, but something in his expression encouraged her to continue. "He assumes that removing private ownership will remove envy, greed, ambition. But those aren't products of property. They're fundamental to who we are. You'd need to change human nature itself to make his vision work. And at that point, are they even human anymore?" A slow smile spread across Valerius's face, and this time it didn't disappear. It was the expression of someone who had just found something unexpected and valuable. Exactly. More's utopia isn't a blueprint, it's a critique. He's showing us that perfection is impossible because we are, as you say, complicated. "You've thought about this before," Verity said, emboldened. "These notes," she gestured to the margins of the book, "they're not casual observations. You've studied this seriously." "I had a thorough education." He said it carefully, and she sensed dangerous ground. More thorough than most overseers receive, I'd wager. His expression shuddered slightly, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he stood and moved to one of the shelves, selecting a slim volume. "If you want to understand More's real genius, read this. His letters to Erasmus. That's where you see the mind behind the satire." He handed her the book, and their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but sent an unexpected shock through her. "You're giving me permission to use the library?" she asked. "I'm saying that a mind like yours shouldn't be wasted on mending and herb gardens, no matter how well you do both." He returned to his desk, pulling a ledger toward him. "The door will remain unlocked. Read whatever you like." Verity clutched the book to her chest, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "Why? Why what? Why are you kind to me? You don't have to be. I'm nothing, no one. My own father sold me to settle a debt. You could work me like a servant, treat me with contempt, and no one would question it. Instead, you build me ramps and share your books and—" Her voice cracked. "Why?" Valerius was quiet for a long moment. When he finally looked up, his gray eyes held something she couldn't quite name. "Because intelligence shouldn't be punished. Because having a lame leg doesn't diminish the quality of your thoughts. Because—" He stopped himself, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not what circumstance has made them appear." The weight of those words settled between them, heavy with meaning she wasn't sure she fully understood. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then returned his attention to his ledger, a clear dismissal. But as Verity left the library, the book of letters pressed against her heart. She heard him speak once more, so quietly she almost missed it. "The pleasure is mine." The man's name was Garrett, and he smelled of cheap gin even at mid-morning. Verity had seen him twice before, lurking near the overseer's house, with the kind of resentment that radiated like heat from a forge. He was one of the estate workers, she'd gathered, though what his specific duties were remained unclear. What was clear was that he bore some grudge against Valerius, and by extension, against anyone associated with him. She had been walking back from the main estate, where she delivered a stack of mended clothes to the housekeeper. The path through the meadow was peaceful, the autumn sun warm on her shoulders, and Flicker trotted happily ahead, investigating every interesting scent. She was thinking about the book she'd left open in the library, a collection of essays on agricultural reform that Valerius had recommended, when Garrett stepped out from behind a stone wall directly into her path. Well, the cripple's out for a stroll. Verity stopped, her hand tightening on her cane. She'd dealt with cruel men before. Her father had taught her that much. The key was to show no fear, give them nothing to feed on. "Good morning, Mr. Garrett. Please excuse me." She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her, swaying slightly. Definitely drunk then. Flicker growled, a sound far more fierce than his small body should have been able to produce. "Not so fast. I want a word with you." His breath was foul as he leaned closer. "Think you're special, don't you? Living in the house with him, playing lady of the manor. But I know what you really are. Payment on a debt, property, a crippled whore keeping his bed warm." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But Verity kept her expression neutral. "You're drunk, Mr. Garrett. Go sleep it off before you say something you'll regret." "Regret?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The only thing I regret is that high and mighty bastard thinking he can lord over us. Coming here with his orders and his fancy words, acting like he owns the place." "He does own the place," Verity said quietly. "Or manages it for the owner. Either way, he's your employer." "Is that what he told you?" Garrett's eyes were mean, red-rimmed. "And you believed him? Stupid bitch. He's no more than we are. Just a jumped-up servant playing at being better than his station." He reached out suddenly, his dirty fingers grasping for her arm. Verity jerked back, but her twisted leg betrayed her, throwing off her balance. She stumbled, and Garrett's hand closed on her wrist, hard enough to bruise. "Let me show you what property's really for." He never finished the sentence. One moment Garrett was there, his grip painful on her wrist. The next, he was on the ground 3 feet away, Valerius standing over him, with murder in his eyes. Verity hadn't even heard him approach. He must have run from somewhere, moved with impossible speed to cover the distance. His chest heaved with exertion or fury, she couldn't tell which. And when he spoke, his voice was completely different from the rough foreman's accent she'd grown accustomed to. "Touch her again, and I will break every bone in your hand." The words were clipped, precise, shaped by an education that went far beyond any common overseer. Pure aristocratic authority rang out in every syllable. "Do you understand me?" Garrett scrambled backward, his drunken bravado evaporating. "I didn't mean, I was just—" "You were assaulting a woman under my protection." Valerius took a step forward, and Garrett actually whimpered. "Get up. Get off my land. If I see you anywhere near this estate again, I'll have you brought up on charges. And trust me." His voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "I have the connections to make them stick." "Your land?" Garrett's confusion would have been comical under other circumstances. "But you're just... get out." The command was absolute. Garrett hauled himself to his feet and ran, stumbling over the uneven ground in his haste to escape. Only then did Valerius turn to Verity. The rage was still there in his eyes, but underneath it she saw something else. Genuine fear. Not for himself, but for her. Did he hurt you? His hands hovered near her arms, not quite touching, as if he was afraid she might break. Your wrist. Let me see. I'm fine, just startled. But she extended her arm anyway, and his fingers, impossibly gentle, examined the red marks Garrett's grip had left. I should have dismissed him weeks ago. I knew he was trouble, but I thought... He stopped himself, jaw clenching. This is my fault. Your fault? You just saved me from... She couldn't finish the sentence, didn't want to think about what might have happened if Valerius hadn't appeared. I should have been here. Should have been watching. His hands were still on her wrist, and that's when she saw it. His sleeve had been pushed back in the struggle, revealing his forearm. A scar ran from just below his elbow, nearly to his wrist, deep, old, and unmistakable. She'd seen a scar like that before, years ago, on a young lord who'd visited her father. A dueling scar, given and received in the formal, ritualized violence that only the aristocracy practiced. Her eyes snapped to his face. He'd noticed her noticing, and something like resignation crossed his features. You're not an overseer, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Verity. That accent you use, it's false. And just now, when you spoke to him, you sounded like... She searched for the right words. You sounded like my father's peers. Like the men who came to our house before the money ran out. Titled men. Important men. Valerius released her wrist and stepped back, his expression closing off. You're shaken. Let me escort you back to the house. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. Don't retreat behind that wall again. Not now, not after. Her voice shook. Who are you? He was silent for a long moment, clearly warring with himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, weary. Someone who needed to see how things truly were, away from the performance and pretense. Someone who was tired of being lied to by men who smile while they steal. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. He met her eyes, and she saw genuine conflict there. I'm not trying to deceive you, Verity. But there are reasons, good reasons, why I can't explain everything. Can't or won't. Both. He picked up her cane, which she'd dropped in the confrontation, and handed it to her. Please, let me get you home. We can discuss this later, when you've had time to calm down. I am calm. But she took the cane, her hands trembling slightly. You called it my land. You said you had connections. You have a dueling scar that's at least 10 years old, which means you were taught to fight with a sword when you were young, which means... Verity. Her name was almost a plea. Not here. Not now. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The fine bones beneath the rough exterior. The perfect posture he sometimes forgot to slouch. The hands that were calloused, but also bore the faint ink stains of someone who spent as much time writing as working. The library full of books that would cost more than most overseers earned in a lifetime. All the pieces were there. She just didn't know what picture they made. Will you tell me eventually? She asked. Yes. The word was a promise. When the time is right. When it's safe. Safe for whom? His smile was sad. For both of us. The solicitor arrived on a gray afternoon 3 days after the incident with Garrett. Verity was in the herb garden, carefully harvesting the last of the chamomile before the first frost. When she heard the carriage, it was finer than any vehicle she'd seen approach the overseer's house. Polished black lacquer with a discreet crest on the door that she couldn't quite make out from this distance. Valerius emerged from the house immediately, as if he'd been expecting the visitor. He'd changed from his usual rough work clothes into something slightly more formal, still simple. But the coat fit him with a precision that spoke of expert tailoring. Verity watched from behind the lavender bushes as an elderly man descended from the carriage, carrying a leather document case. They spoke briefly in the yard, too quietly for her to hear, then moved into the house. The front door closed firmly behind them. Verity returned to her chamomile, telling herself it was none of her business. Valerius was entitled to his privacy, entitled to receive visitors without her spying on him. She'd been at Shadowmere for nearly a month now, and while the mystery of who he truly was had only deepened, she'd found a strange peace in not pressing for answers. Whatever secrets he kept, he'd shown her nothing but kindness. That was enough. Or it should have been. But when she came inside half an hour later, her basket full of herbs that needed drying, she could hear voices from the library. The door was closed, but not latched completely, and sound carried clearly down the stairs. "Cannot continue this charade indefinitely, Your Grace." The elderly man's voice was cultured, concerned. "The estate requires decisions that only you can make, and making them through intermediaries is becoming increasingly complicated." "Your Grace." Verity froze on the stairs, her basket forgotten. "Your Grace." The form of address used for dukes and duchesses, the highest rank of nobility below the royal family itself. "I'm aware of the complications, Fitzwilliam." That was Valerius, his voice carrying none of the rough edges he used with the workers. This was pure aristocratic precision. "But the situation here required my personal attention. You know as well as I do that the reports I was receiving bore no resemblance to reality." "Of course, Your Grace. Your instincts were, as always, correct. The previous steward was indeed embezzling, and quite extensively. But now that you've uncovered the extent of the corruption, surely you can return to Ironwood House and manage the rest through proper channels." Ironwood House. Duke of Ironwood. Verity's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the step, her mind reeling. The Duke of Ironwood was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in England. She'd never seen him. He was known for being intensely private, rarely appearing at court or social functions. But everyone knew of him. Vast holdings across 3 counties. Influence that reached into Parliament itself. A reputation for cold brilliance and absolute intolerance for incompetence or deception. And he'd been living here, in this modest house, pretending to be an overseer, pretending to be common. The situation is more complex than simple embezzlement. Valerius, no, the Duke, was saying. The corruption ran deep. Half the workers were involved in some capacity, either actively stealing or turning a blind eye. I needed to see who could be trusted, who was complicit, who was simply afraid. "And have you determined that now?" "Largely, yes. Garrett was the last of the truly rotten ones. I've dismissed him and 3 others. The rest are honest enough, just poorly led." "Then your work here is done, Your Grace. You can install a proper steward and return to your duties in London. The Duke of Ironwood cannot simply vanish for months. People talk." There was a pause. When Valerius spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost reluctant. "There is another complication." "My lord?" "The girl. Verity." Verity's breath caught. She should leave, should flee to her room before she heard something she couldn't unhear. But her body wouldn't obey. "Ah, yes. The unfortunate daughter." Fitzwilliam's tone was carefully neutral. "Thornwood's debt settlement. A distasteful business, if I may say so. I trust she's proven adequate to whatever tasks you've assigned her." She's proven far more than adequate. There was an edge to Valerius's voice now, something protective. She's intelligent, educated, resourceful. Her father is a fool who couldn't recognize value if it struck him in the face. Of course, Your Grace. But surely you see that her presence here complicates your position. When you resume your proper identity, what becomes of her? She cannot remain at the overseer's house when there's an actual overseer in residence. And you can hardly bring her to Ironwood House. A nobleman's daughter, acquired as payment for debt, living under your roof? The scandal would be extraordinary. Silence. Long enough that Verity wondered if they'd somehow discovered her eavesdropping. I'm aware of the complications, Valerius finally said, and his voice was rough with something that might have been pain. I'm working on a solution. What sort of solution? That's not your concern, Fitzwilliam. Not yet. The sound of papers being moved. These documents, the new steward's contract, the revised accounts, they're acceptable. I'll sign them. But I'm not leaving Shadowmere immediately. Your Grace, I must advise. Your advice is noted. I'll return to London when I'm ready, and not before. And the girl is also not your concern. The words were ice cold now, pure ducal authority. Speak of her with respect, Fitzwilliam, or don't speak of her at all. Is that understood? Of course, Your Grace. My apologies if I gave offense. Verity heard movement, the sound of the Duke. She couldn't think of him as Valerius anymore, not now. Walking toward the door. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the protest from her bad leg, and fled as quietly as she could up the remaining stairs. She made it to her room just as she heard the library door open below. She closed her door and leaned against it, her heart hammering. The Duke of Ironwood. One of the most powerful men in England had been living in a modest house, cooking his own meals, building her a ramp, sharing his library, discussing philosophy with her as if she were his equal. And he defended her, told his own solicitor to speak of her with respect. But Fitzwilliam was right about the complications. What happened now? When Valerius, the Duke, returned to his real life, what became of her? She was still property acquired through debt settlement, still unmarriageable, still crippled. The fact that he'd been kind to her, that he'd treated her like a person rather than chattel, didn't change the fundamental impossibility of her situation. Through her window, she watched the solicitor's carriage depart. The Duke stood in the yard, his posture rigid, watching it go. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of whatever decisions he was wrestling with. He'd lied to her. For weeks, he'd maintained an elaborate deception, let her believe he was something he wasn't. But hadn't she known, really? Hadn't all the signs been there? The library, the education, the dueling scar, the way he'd spoken to Garrett with such absolute authority? She'd known and hadn't wanted to see, because seeing would mean acknowledging that this fragile piece she'd found couldn't last. That eventually, reality would intrude, and the Duke of Ironwood would have to return to being himself. And she would have to return to being nothing at all. Verity waited until evening, when the sky had darkened to indigo and the house was quiet. She found him in the library, as she knew she would, sitting at his desk with ledgers spread before him. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the aristocratic angles she'd been trying so hard not to see. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps? Or relief that the pretense was finally ending. "You heard?" he said. Not a question. "I heard?" She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, needing its support. Her cane was in her other hand, knuckles white around its handle. "Your Grace." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Address you by your proper title? The Duke of Ironwood should be addressed correctly, shouldn't he? Or do you prefer the common touch? Should I call you Valerius, the humble overseer who splits wood and builds ramps and pretends to be something he's not?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with a hurt she hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. He stood slowly, his movements careful, as if approaching something wild that might bolt. "I never pretended to be something I'm not," he said quietly. "I only pretended not to be something I am. There's a difference. A semantic one. An important one." He moved around the desk, but kept his distance, respecting the space between them. "Everything I've shown you, everything I've been with you, that's real, Verity. The title is what's false. The performance. The Your Grace and the bowing, and the people who smile while they steal from me because they think I'm too far removed to notice. So you came here to play at being common? To see how the other half lives?" The bitterness surprised her, but she couldn't contain it. Was it entertaining, Your Grace? Watching the crippled girl believe she'd found something resembling kindness? "Stop calling me that." His voice hardened. And no, it wasn't entertainment. It was necessity. "Explain it to me, then." She moved into the room, her leg aching from the tension in her body. "Make me understand why one of the most powerful men in England thought it necessary to lie to someone who has absolutely no power at all." He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, the words seemed dragged from somewhere deep. "6 months ago, I received reports that this estate was underperforming. Yields were down, profits were halved, workers were leaving. My steward provided explanations: poor weather, disease, normal fluctuations. But something felt wrong." He paced to the window, looking out into the darkness. "I sent auditors. They found nothing amiss, or so they claimed. I sent new overseers. Within weeks, they were sending the same reports as before. Everything was fine. The problems were natural, unavoidable. But they weren't. They weren't." He turned back to her. "So I came myself. Not as the Duke, not with announcements and fanfare that would give everyone time to hide their tracks. I came as Valerius, a foreman sent by the creditors to assess the situation. Anonymous, unimportant. The kind of man people ignore. And what did you find? Theft, corruption. A steward who was selling my grain and livestock and pocketing the proceeds, cooking the books to hide the losses. Workers who were being paid half what they were owed, with the rest disappearing into various pockets. Equipment being sold off and replaced with inferior goods. It was systematic, extensive, and it had been going on for years." Verity absorbed this, her anger cooling slightly in the face of his obvious frustration. "And as the Duke, you couldn't have discovered this?" "As the Duke, everyone would have hidden it, cleaned up the evidence, presented a perfect facade, smiled and bowed, and lied to my face." His hands clenched. "They already had, through my auditors and overseers. I needed to see the truth, not the performance. And the only way to do that was to become invisible. You're many things, Your Grace, but invisible isn't one of them." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You'd be surprised how invisible a title makes you. People see the Duke, not the man. They see power and privilege in someone who couldn't possibly understand their lives. They perform for me. They lie." He moved closer, his eyes intense. "But as Valerius the foreman, I was just another working man. People spoke freely around me, showed me who they really were. Including me? Especially you. The words were soft, almost tender. You had no reason to be anything but yourself. No reason to perform or pretend or try to impress someone you thought was barely above you in station. The implication stung. So I was part of your experiment? A way to observe the authentic reactions of the lower classes? No. He closed the remaining distance between them, and she could see genuine anguish in his face. You were never part of any experiment. You were... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Your father gave you to me as payment on a debt. You arrived broken and resigned, and convinced of your own worthlessness. And I saw you, Verity. Not the cripple, not the burden, not the unmarriageable daughter. I saw your mind, your strength, your ridiculous devotion to that small dog. I saw who you actually were. And who was that? Someone remarkable. The words were almost a whisper. Someone I wanted to know. Someone I wanted to... He stopped himself again, jaw clenching. Wanted to what? It doesn't matter. Because Fitzwilliam was right. The situation is impossible. He turned away, putting distance between them again. When I returned to London, to being the Duke publicly, you can't stay here. It wouldn't be appropriate. But I won't abandon you, Verity. I'll make provisions, ensure you're settled somewhere comfortable, with an income. You'll pay me off. Her voice was flat, like a servant being let go. I'll ensure you're taken care of. That's not the same thing. No. He faced her again, and the naked emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. It's not. But I don't know what else to do. I'm the Duke of Ironwood. You're the daughter of a viscount who sold you to settle a debt. There's no scenario where we... He gestured helplessly between them. It can't work. Because I'm crippled. Because society would destroy you. His voice was fierce now. They already whisper about you, about your father's disgrace. If you were associated with me in any capacity other than proper employment, the rumors would be vicious. They'd call you my mistress, say terrible things, make your life unbearable. They already say terrible things. My life has been unbearable. She moved closer, her heart hammering. You asked me before if your name changed who you were to me. So I'm asking you. Does my reputation, my leg, my father's disgrace, do those change who I am to you? Of course not. Then why do titles matter? Why does it make any difference if you're a duke or a foreman, if I'm a viscount's daughter or a nobody? Because the world makes it matter, Verity. Because I have responsibilities, obligations. Because people depend on me and watch me and expect. He stopped, his expression crumbling. Because I don't know how to protect you from what being close to me would bring. She understood then. Not rejection, but fear. Fear of what his world would do to her. Does my name change who I am to you now? She asked, echoing his earlier question. No, never. The words were certain, absolute. Then that's all that matters. The rest, she gestured vaguely, we'll figure out the rest. Verity. You're the Duke of Ironwood, she said, one of the most powerful men in England. Surely you can find a way to protect one insignificant woman. He stared at her, something like hope flickering across his features before he suppressed it. You don't know what you're asking. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you who I am to you matters more than who you are to the world. She met his eyes steadily. Now you have to decide if that's true for you too. The letter arrived on a cold morning 2 weeks later, delivered by a rider who looked as disreputable as the man who had sent him. Valerius, Verity still couldn't quite think of him as the Duke, not in the privacy of her own mind, opened it at the breakfast table and went very still. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her tea. He handed her the letter without a word. The handwriting was her father's, hasty and irregular, the paper cheap. But the words made her blood run cold. "Valerius, I am informed that circumstances have changed regarding my daughter. A previously unknown inheritance has come to light, making her immediate return necessary. I will arrive at Shadowmere on the 15th to collect her and settle any remaining matters. I trust this will be acceptable." Thornwood. An inheritance? Verity's hands trembled slightly. "I don't understand. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. There's nothing?" "Your mother's aunt," Valerius said quietly, his eyes scanning a second document that had been included. "Apparently she died 3 months ago and left you a dower house in Kent and an income of £200 per annum. Not a fortune, but respectable. And suddenly I'm worth retrieving." The bitterness was acid on her tongue. "When I was worthless, he gave me away. Now that I have value, he wants you back." Valerius's voice had gone cold, dangerous. "The 15th. That's today." As if summoned by the words, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel reached them. Flicker, who had been dozing by the fire, leaped up and began barking furiously. Through the window, Verity could see an ornate carriage bearing her father's crest, tarnished and peeling, but still recognizable, rolling to a stop in the yard. Viscount Rupert Thornwood emerged, dressed in his finest coat despite its frayed cuffs and outdated cut. He was accompanied by another man, younger and harder looking, who surveyed the property with calculating eyes. A lawyer, Verity guessed, or something similar. "He's early," she whispered. "Valerius, what do we... go upstairs?" His voice was utterly calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Stay in your room until I call for you. I won't hide from him. Verity." He turned to her, and his eyes were fierce. "Trust me. Please. Just this once. Trust me and go upstairs." Something in his expression made her nod. She gathered Flicker and retreated to the stairs. But she didn't go to her room. Instead, she stopped halfway up, where she could see the main room through the banister rails without being immediately visible. Valerius waited by the fire, still in his simple work clothes, as the front door opened without the courtesy of a knock. Her father strode in as if he owned the place, the lawyer at his heels. "Valerius." Rupert's tone was perfunctory, dismissive. "I trust my letter was clear. I've come for my daughter." "So I gathered." Valerius's voice was neutral, the rough accent back in place. "Quite a change from when you couldn't wait to be rid of her." "Circumstances change. She's inherited property, which means she's under my guardianship again until she marries." Rupert looked around the modest room with barely concealed disdain. "Where is she? Fetch her. We have a long journey ahead." "No." The single word fell like a stone into still water. Rupert's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no." Valerius straightened, and something in his posture changed. The slouch disappeared, replaced by a bearing that was unmistakably aristocratic. "Lady Verity is not going anywhere with you." "Lady Verity?" Rupert laughed, the sound harsh. "She's hardly a lady anymore, is she?" You've had her here for 2 months, living under your roof unchaperoned. But I'm willing to overlook that indiscretion given the circumstances. Now, be a good fellow and... You're not listening. Valerius's voice had changed too, the rough edges falling away to reveal pure, cold precision. I said she's not going with you. The lawyer stepped forward. Now see here, my good man. The Viscount has legal guardianship over his daughter. Whatever arrangement you had with him regarding debt settlement is superseded by nothing. Valerius moved toward the stairs, and Verity's heart stuttered as she realized what he was doing. Wait here, both of you. He climbed the stairs, his eyes finding hers in the shadows. Without a word, he took her hand and led her to his chamber, the room she'd never entered, at the end of the hall. Inside, he moved to the wardrobe and pulled out garments she'd never seen him wear. A coat of midnight blue superfine, cut with exquisite precision. A waistcoat of silver silk. A cravat of blinding white linen. Beneath them, polished boots that gleamed like black mirrors. Help me, he said quietly, and began to change. Verity's hands shook as she held out the coat, watched him transform from Valerius the foreman into something else entirely. The clothes fit him perfectly because they'd been made for him, tailored to his exact measurements by craftsmen who dressed only the highest nobility. His hair, usually pulled back carelessly, he tied with a black ribbon that somehow made him look even more austere and commanding. When he was finished, he looked like what he was. One of the most powerful men in England, magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Stay close to me, he said, offering his arm. And whatever happens, don't be afraid. They descended the stairs together, Verity's hand on his arm, and the transformation in her father's face would have been comical if it weren't so serious. Rupert's eyes widened, confusion and the first edge of fear creeping into his expression. What is this? He demanded. Some kind of costume? Do you think dressing in fine clothes will... You don't recognize me? It wasn't a question. Valerius, no, the Duke, moved into the full light of the fire, and his presence seemed to fill the entire room. We met once, Thornwood. 5 years ago, at Lady Pemberton's ball. You tried to interest me in some investment scheme. I declined. Rupert's face had gone pale. No, that's not possible. Allow me to properly introduce myself. The Duke's voice was ice and iron. Valerius Flint, Duke of Ironwood. And this, he gestured to the house around them, is my property, my estate, where you brought your daughter 2 months ago as payment for the £15,000 you owed to my creditors. The Duke of... The lawyer had gone white as parchment. Your Grace, we had no idea. The letter said only... The letter said what I wanted it to say. The Duke's eyes never left Rupert's face. You thought you were dealing with a servant, a nobody, someone you could dismiss an order about. How does it feel, Thornwood, to realize you gave your daughter to a duke? This is outrageous. Rupert had recovered some of his bluster, though his hands were shaking. Whatever game you're playing, it doesn't matter. She's my daughter, my ward, and she has an inheritance that requires proper management. You have no legal claim to her. Don't I? The Duke's smile was sharp as a blade. You gave her to me, Thornwood. Signed documents to that effect. Payment in kind for debt settled. I have your signature, witnessed and notarized. That was when she was worthless. Now she has property. She was never worthless. The words cracked like a whip. And she is no longer your property, Thornwood. She is mine. The possessiveness in those words sent heat through Verity's chest. The Duke pulled her closer, his arm sliding around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and claiming. "This is illegal," the lawyer sputtered. "You can't just—" "Can't I?" The Duke's eyebrow rose. "I'm the Duke of Ironwood. I sit in the House of Lords. I have the ear of the Prime Minister. Exactly what do you think you can do to stop me?" Rupert's face had gone from pale to red. "You've ruined her. 2 months unchaperoned with a man, even a duke." "Then I'll marry her." The words fell into the room like thunderbolts. Verity's breath stopped. The Duke looked down at her, his expression softening for just a moment. "If she'll have me." The silence that followed stretched impossibly long. Verity's heart hammered so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. The Duke, Valerius, was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified all at once. "If she'll have me," he repeated quietly, and the repetition made it real. "This is madness." Rupert's voice cracked. "You can't possibly mean to marry her. She's a cripple, unmarriageable. She has nothing to offer a man of your station." "She has everything to offer." The Duke's voice cut across his words like a sword. "Intelligence, courage, kindness, a mind that challenges mine, a spirit that survived 18 years of your cruelty and somehow remained gentle." He turned fully to Verity now, his hands finding hers. "She has worth beyond measure, and the only madness is that you never saw it." Verity's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Not because of him, not because of obligation. I'm not." He raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I'm doing this because somewhere between building you a ramp and arguing about More's utopia, I fell in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably." The world seemed to tilt. "You... what?" "I love you." The words came easier the second time, stronger. "I think I started loving you the moment you thanked me for letting Flicker stay. Such a small mercy, and you were so grateful. Like you'd never expected kindness from anyone." His thumb stroked across her palm. "I wanted to give you everything, show you that you deserved everything. But She gestured helplessly at herself, at her twisted leg, at all the inadequacies that had been catalogued for so long. "Perfect exactly as you are." He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. "Your leg doesn't define you, Verity. It's simply part of who you are. Like your love of medicinal herbs, or the way you bite your lip when you're thinking deeply about something. I don't love you despite your imperfections. I love you, all of you, including the parts you think make you less." "This is absurd," Rupert sputtered. "A duke doesn't marry. A duke marries whom he chooses." Valerius didn't even look at him. "And I choose Verity, if she'll have me." Verity searched his face, looking for doubt, for pity, for any sign that this was duty or honor compelling him. But all she saw was love, raw and honest and completely overwhelming. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Before. Why wait until—" "Because I'm a coward." A rueful smile touched his lips. "Because I convinced myself it was impossible. Because you deserved better than a man who started your acquaintance with deception, who brought you here as property and took weeks to see the cage he'd put you in." His hands tightened on hers. "Because I was afraid you'd say no." "No?" She almost laughed. "I fell in love with you when you were supposedly a foreman, when I thought you were as far from my station as possible to fall. Did you really think discovering you're a duke would make me love you less? His smile transformed his face, brilliant and genuine. Then you do. Love you? Of course I love you, you impossible man. The tears escaped now, tracking down her cheeks. I loved Valerius the foreman. I love Valerius the duke. I love you, whoever you are. He pulled her close, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between. Your Grace, this is highly irregular, the lawyer began. Get out. The Duke didn't raise his voice, didn't even turn around, but the command was absolute. Both of you, off my property, now. You can't simply, Rupert started. I can, and I am. Now Valerius did turn, keeping Verity tucked against his side. Your daughter is of age. She can choose her own guardian, and she chooses me. You have no legal standing here, Thornwood. And if you attempt to make trouble, I will use every resource at my disposal to make your life infinitely more difficult than it already is. His smile was sharp. £15,000 was only the debt I acquired. I've been making inquiries. Shall we discuss the other creditors circling? The mortgages on property you don't actually own? The forged letters of credit? Rupert's face went gray. You're bluffing. Try me. 2 words, soft as silk and hard as steel. The lawyer was already backing toward the door, clearly wanting no part of whatever scandal might erupt. My Lord Viscount, perhaps we should— Yes, you should. Valerius gestured toward the exit. Don't let the door strike you on your way out. Rupert looked at Verity, perhaps seeing her truly for the first time in years. She met his eyes steadily, no longer the frightened, resigned girl he'd given away. His daughter was going to be a duchess, and he'd thrown her away like rubbish. The realization seemed to break something in him. Without another word, he turned and left, the lawyer scurrying after him. The door closed behind them with a definitive click. In the sudden silence, Flicker trotted out from wherever he'd been hiding during the confrontation, tail wagging. He looked between Verity and Valerius, seemed to approve of what he saw, and promptly jumped onto the chair by the fire, circling twice before settling down as if nothing momentous had just occurred. Valerius laughed. The sound startled out of him. Your dog has the right idea. Act as if this was always inevitable. Wasn't it? Verity asked. Somehow? Perhaps. He turned to her, his expression growing serious. Then, to her shock, he sank down onto one knee before her, taking her hand. I know I already asked, but I want to do this properly. Verity Elise Thornwood, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not because of your father, not because of obligation, but because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it. She looked down at him, this powerful duke kneeling before her. The gesture acknowledging everything she'd been told made her less. Her twisted leg, her lack of fortune, her father's disgrace. He knelt as if she were the one conferring honor, as if marrying her would be a privilege rather than a burden. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. He rose and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers again. I'll take you to Ironwood House, he said. Introduce you properly. Let you choose how to redecorate because God knows it needs a woman's touch. We'll have the bands read, do everything correctly this time. I don't need grand gestures, she said. I just need you. You'll have both. He kissed her forehead. Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours now. 3 months later, Verity stood in the grand ballroom of Ironwood House, now the Duchess of Ironwood, and watched her husband, dance with the Dowager Countess of somewhere or other. Society had been shocked by the announcement, of course. A duke marrying the disgraced daughter of a nearly bankrupt viscount? Scandalous. That she was also lame? Unprecedented. But the Duke of Ironwood cared nothing for scandal, and slowly, reluctantly, society had accepted what it could not change. Those who whispered found themselves excluded from the Duke's considerable influence. Those who welcomed the new Duchess found themselves rewarded. Verity didn't need their approval. She had Valerius's love, work that mattered. She'd already begun reforming the charitable works on all the Ironwood estates, and a small terrier who now slept on a velvet cushion in the Duchess's private sitting room. As if summoned by her thoughts, Valerius appeared at her side, rescuing her from a conversation with a tedious baron. "Dance with me," he said, offering his hand. "You know I can't dance properly. Then we'll dance improperly." He led her onto the floor, his arms strong around her waist, supporting her weight. They moved slowly, carefully, and she knew people were watching, judging. She didn't care. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Impossibly so." She looked up at him. "You? I have you. How could I be anything else?" And there, in a ballroom full of witnesses, the Duke of Ironwood kissed his Duchess, and the world could say what it liked. They had each other, and that was everything. And there we have it, my beautiful family. Verity's journey from being deemed worthless to becoming the Duchess of Ironwood, cherished beyond measure. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every moment of Verity's pain and triumph, if you believed alongside her that true worth isn't defined by what others see, but by who we truly are, then I have a small favor to ask. Please hit that like button right now. Let me know this story resonated with you. Your likes tell me what stories to create more of, what journeys matter most to you. And if you're not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Join our family of viewers who believe in second chances, hidden identities, and love that sees beyond the surface. We have so many more stories waiting for you. Dukes in disguise, forgotten heirs, overlooked daughters who become queens. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was your favorite moment? Was it when Valerius built the ramp, when he defended her from Garrett? Or that final moment when he knelt before her? I read every single comment, and your thoughts fuel the next story. And finally, share this with someone who needs to hear that they are worthy, exactly as they are. Someone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they weren't enough. Verity's story might be exactly what they need today. Until our next story, remember, true worth cannot be hidden forever. Someone will see you, truly see you, and recognize the treasure others missed. I'll see you in the next story. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.